Well, in what sense is our society male-dominated?
The fact that the vast majority of wealth is owned by men, the vast majority of capital is owned by men. Women do more unpaid labour.
Very tiny proportion of men, and a huge proportion of people who are seriously disaffected are men. Most people in prison are men. Most people who are on the street are men. Most victims of violent crime are men. Most people who commit suicide are men. Most people who die in wars are men. People who do worse in school are men. It's like, where's the dominance here precisely? What you're doing is you're taking a tiny substrata of hyper-successful men and using that to represent the entire structure of Western society. There's nothing about that that's vaguely appropriate. There's nothing about that that's vaguely appropriate. There's nothing about that that's vaguely appropriate.
So, is there a patriarchy? Yes, obviously. I mean, that's the short answer. If you're a convoluted moron like Jordan Peterson and you act like a reactionary rather than giving a shit about the meaning behind words, then I guess I don't have to waste my time arguing an obvious point. The word patriarchy means power is centered among men in society, right? A society is patriarchal if the overwhelming majority of power is with men and women have relatively little power. And the two main pillars of power in our society is money and politics. I don't think anyone worth being taken seriously would disagree with that. Who owns the majority of the wealth in the world? Is a millionaire more likely to be a man or a woman? Obviously a man, right? We all know this to be true, yet I'm here arguing with a goddamn college professor about it. Is a politician more likely to be a man or a woman? Man, obvious. I don't think I need to go find the stats to prove that. It's like arguing about whether or not the sky is blue. We basically already know the answer, right? Is anyone really going to put up a serious fight on that subject? So if the majority of wealth and political power resides with men and very little relative wealth or power resides with women, then the statement, "we live in a patriarchal society," is a true statement. When Jordan Peterson goes on to talk about the suffering of men, he's just avoiding the subject. It has nothing to do with anything. The amount of homeless men or depressed men, it's a serious problem, but it has nothing to do with whether or not society is mostly run by men. You know, on this subject, it's not relevant at all. I mean, it's relevant to other problems, but I mean, it's just an absurd response that is just decided to tug on your heartstrings without offering anything intellectual or even relevant to the topic. The topic has nothing to do with any of that. And if you seriously think that talking about homeless guys is in any way relevant when discussing whether or not the majority of politicians and leaders are men, well, let me give you an analogy then, okay? To clarify so that even a child can understand how dumb this response is, okay? Because it really is a completely irrelevant point. Let's say you're arguing with a fellow baker, okay? Suspend your disbelief for a second. You're a baker. You have a fellow man. He's arguing with you. And you say to her, "You know what I just noticed? There are way more cakes in the bakery than there's sausages." And in response, your fellow baker turns to you with a disapproving look and like saying, "No, I don't believe so. I mean, what about all the cakes that are in the trash or in the old people's nursing home or at birthday parties? The amount of cakes in the bakery is actually a minority of cakes when you think about it. Therefore, there isn't actually more cakes than sausages in the bakery." How would you react to that point? Would you A, turn to him and say, "Oh man, that's a really good point. I've never thought of that." Or would you B, look at them in disbelief for a few seconds and retort, Are you fucking stupid? What does that have to do with anything to do with the fucking ratio of cakes to sausages in the bakery? Stop drinking on the job, Peterson. It just has nothing to do with anything. It might very well it might be true that the majority of homeless people are men. Men have a tendency to be homeless. The minority of men are in power. All of those things can be true, and it can still be true that the majority of people in power are men. Like, all of those things can be true at the same time because they have nothing to do with each other. They do not influence each other whatsoever. Like, inarguably true that we live in a patriarchal society, and if you disagree with that, then you basically have to argue about whether or not men, the majority of people that are leaders, or the majority of the people that are holding wealth, are men. Are you going to argue with me on that? I don't think you are you? Right? So if you're going to concede that, then you basically conceded the entire argument. We live in a patriarchal society. Get the fuck over it. It's not a question that's up for debate. It's obviously a true statement. I mean, of course you can argue all kinds of secondary things on top of that statement, like, is it a good thing or a bad thing that society is patriarchal, right? What are the effects of that? Is it just a natural flow of things, or is it heavily driven by culture, or both? And if so, to what degree, right? Does the changing of the system cost more than it benefits us? I mean, these are all questions that we could argue, right? But neither of them have anything to do with whether or not society is patriarchal. You first have to admit that it is patriarchal, and then we can argue all of these secondary points. You can't sit there and pretend like it isn't patriarchal just because you refuse to give any leeway or land to people you disagree with. Like, if your disdain for feminists is so great that you don't care about logic anymore, then I guess talking with you is meaningless, right? I mean, fuck. You know, Peterson's claim that there's no patriarchy in this, I mean, he's just false. And obviously so. It's not even a difficult topic. He's obviously false. I don't understand why anyone fell for that. What? Like, you're clearly not paying attention to the discussion. The fact that I even have to have this conversation with, like, an otherwise semi-intelligent man, and it's fucking embarrassing. Like, Jesus Christ. Like, please up your game, because, I mean, at the moment, you guys seem like you're acting willfully dense just because you have this shitty reactionary attitude towards anything to do with women's rights, and it's frankly giving me a fucking headache. Can you stop jerking off to, like, Jordan Peterson and your fanboyism and actually give a shit about the things we're talking about? Or is that too much to ask? I don't fucking... of course, these are the same people are, like, absolutely convinced that they're... God damn it, life is a fucking parody. Why do I have to deal with you people?
That's my idea of the patriarchy, which is a system of male dominance of society.
Yeah, but that's not my sense of the patriarchy.
So what's yours?
Well, in what sense is our society male-dominated?
The fact that the vast majority of wealth is owned by men, the vast majority of capital is owned by men. Women do more unpaid labour.
Very tiny proportion of men.